Number 10. The skin suit. There's nobody in the world as creepy and horrifying as Ed Gein. This guy is notorious for the brutal murder spree he went on back in the 1950s. He's also known as the Butcher of Plainfield. He had a bit of a problem with peeling people's skin off and turning it into creepy stuff. Back in 1957, when police raided Ed's farmhouse looking for a missing shop owner, they instead found a literal house of horrors. They did indeed find the body of Bernice Worden, but the body had been decapitated and gutted just like a deer. The police also found bowls that had been crafted from human skulls, and a belt made from nipples, and a lampshade created from a stretched human face. Not only that, but Ed used the skins taken from various women he had killed to make himself a skin suit. In the end, Ed told the police he wanted to climb inside his skin suit so he could become his dead mother. Basically, Ed Gein holds the title as the creepiest person to have ever existed. Of course, Ed Gein has inspired a lot of horror characters throughout the years. Mostly, it's been his legendary skin suit that has gotten the attention. For example, in Silence of the Lambs, the killer Buffalo Bill is based on Ed Gein. So is Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Norman Bates from Psycho. Number 9. The Monkey Spy. During the Napoleonic Wars in the early 19th century, the English did something absolutely horrible. They hung an innocent monkey, mistaking him for a French spy. To this day, the people of Hartlepool are called monkey killers or monkey hangers by people from the rest of the country. Why was a monkey hung like a common criminal, though? Well, it all started when a French ship was spotted off the coast of Hartlepool. The good townsfolk were nervous about a French invasion, so they rushed to the beach to see what was going on. They found only one survivor from the wreckage of the ship. It was a monkey dressed in a miniature military uniform. There was probably no sight more adorable in all of England at the time, but there was a big issue. The people of this small town had never seen a Frenchman before. They actually thought the monkey was a Frenchman, a French spy trying to infiltrate British society. The most bizarre trial ever ensued. The monkey was brought to court to see if it was guilty of spying. Unfortunately for the monkey, he was a monkey and he couldn't really answer any of the questions he was asked. So the townsfolk did what townsfolk do best. They dragged him down to the town square, got him up into the gallows, and they hung that poor monkey. Here's the creepy part of the story, though. Back in those days, small children were usually employed on warships to prime cannons with gunpowder because they were small and could easily fit into tight spaces. They were called powder monkeys. To this day, historical experts believe it wasn't a real monkey hung by the Hartlepool people, but actually a small child. Number 8. The baby cage. There was a very creepy craze that swept across the nation between 1934 and 1948. The sensation was known as the baby cage. Yes, a cage for babies. This bizarre invention was created in 1922, though the idea came from 1884, when Dr. Luther Emmett Holt described in a book called The Care and Feeding of Children that babies should be properly aired out. The belief was that babies needed fresh air in order to purify their blood. Giving a baby plenty of air was just as important as feeding it proper food. So how does a person living in the busy city in the 1930s give a baby sufficient air for the purification of its blood? Well, the obvious answer is to put your baby in a cage and attach the cage to the outside of your apartment window. By doing this, people believed they would improve the baby's appetite, that they would help its digestion, and that it would just generally be healthier. Also, people believed that by sticking their babies out in the cold wind, they would toughen them up. Babies would be able to withstand the common cold. They would become impervious to cold temperatures, and they would just be generally better. By the late 1940s, baby cages became unfashionable, something about safety concerns, no doubt. Number 7. Eaten alive. James Jameson was the heir of the Jameson Irish whiskey fortune in the 1880s. He had fortune beyond compare. He was what you might call an elite member of society. And what did elite members of society do with their money 140 years ago? Well, James used his cash to travel to Africa, purchase a 10-year-old child, and then draw her being eaten alive by cannibals. This is a very real thing that happened by every historical account. James was the great-great-grandson of John Jameson, the guy who came up with your favorite Irish whiskey. In the 1800s, adventuring and exploring the remotest corners of the world was kind of a huge deal, especially to those who could afford to do it. So in 1888, James joined the Emin Pasha Relief Expedition to move across Central Africa. At the time, the Congo was a Belgian Free State colony. It was occupied by Belgian forces. But here's the incident with the cannibalism. It happened in June. Accounts from both Jameson's diary, his wife, and a translator from the trip all agree more or less on the details. They were at a trading post deep in the jungle of the Congo, famous for its population of cannibals. Jameson dealt directly with one of the most notorious slave traders in all of Africa at the time, a man named Tip. Jameson wanted to see someone eaten. With the help of the slave trader, he got himself a young slave girl. Then he took her to one of the cannibal villages and handed her over as a present, at which point the child was tied to a tree and eaten alive. While the tribesmen ripped her limbs off and ate her flesh, James Jameson sat back in his comfy chair and sketched the scene in his notebook. Number 6. Coffin birth. During the days of the Black Death in Italy, there was a lot of creepy stuff going on, but this next one really takes the cake. Scientists recently investigated a grave from the 14th century, located a handful of miles outside Genoa, Italy. Genoa is the city in which the plague really took root in Europe before spreading throughout the entire continent. Inside of this mysterious grave, scientists discovered the bodies of 4 people. There was a woman who had died in her 30s, a child of about 12, and another child of about 3. The 4th skeleton is the most horrifying, though. Scientists discovered the remains of a baby, but what exactly was it doing in the coffin? It was born after the woman died. This lady gave birth from beyond the grave, and the baby likely perished inside the coffin without anyone ever knowing it existed. It's known as a coffin birth, and it's a very strange phenomenon. Coffin birth can happen after death when the gases inside a pregnant woman's body build up enough and cause the unexpected expulsion of the fetus. It doesn't happen very often, but it's pretty shocking when it does. Number 5. History's first serial killer. Gilles de Rais is often called the first true serial killer in history, and yeah, the guy's a bit of a creep. He was a Breton nobleman who fought in the 100 Years' War and was friends with Joan of Arc, but he never rose to fame or secured his place in the Hall of Heroes because he may have had a bit of an issue with murdering children. In 1429, Gilles was given the position of Marshal of France, the highest military distinction in the country. His military career then began to slow down once Joan of Arc died in 1431. He spent most of his time at his estate after that. He financed the construction of a new chapel in 1433 and named it the Chapel of Holy Innocents. He staffed the chapel with a choir of young boys who he himself selected. And here's where the creepy rumors began. Some say Gilles de Rais began consorting with alchemists and sorcerers. At the same time, people started growing suspicious of the man and his estate because children were going missing in the general area. He was eventually arrested in 1440 after kidnapping a priest. And it was only after that the accusations came out that he had murdered at least 100 children. He was sentenced to be burned and hung and was executed on October 26th of that same year. Number 4. The dungeon beneath the house. Joseph Fritzl was the most disgusting, creepy, and despicable human being that ever lived. Well, I guess that's kind of hard to make a firm decision about considering the guy we just talked about had killed 100 kids and was burned alive for it, but still, Joseph was pretty awful. In August of 1984, he locked his daughter in the cellar beneath their house and he never let her out. He had been building a dungeon complex beneath his house since the decade before. He got permission from the city to build the dungeon. Of course, they didn't know what it was going to be used for, and he gathered all the supplies himself to get everything just right. Then he tricked his daughter once it was finished and locked her behind a series of doors in a dungeon built exactly for this purpose. He had premeditated kidnapping his own child for years, turning her into his personal property. And what's really crazy is that Joseph's wife had no idea what was going on. She thought their daughter just kind of ran away. Joseph kept their daughter in the cold and the dark of that dungeon for the next 24 years. And during that time, she would birth 7 of his babies, 3 of which were forced to stay underground and grew up to be basically goblins. The others were adopted by their father/grandfather. In the end, the daughter was finally freed when her 19-year-old kid became gravely ill, and Joseph drove her to the hospital. The doctors became suspicious, and the daughter was finally released, and Joseph Fritzl is still in jail today. Number 3. Buffalo Priest. A priest in Buffalo has been accused of touching somebody a little too inappropriately this past January. The name of the priest was not given, though he was described as being elderly. Apparently, the priest was retired but still said Mass at a variety of different churches. The girl who complained about the behavior told someone at school that there had been an incident with the priest. The district attorney's office became aware of the allegations, and they launched an investigation. However, the Erie County District Attorney's Office later came out and said that there was absolutely no grounds to lay charges. District Attorney John J. Flynn said the priest's conduct wasn't criminal, but it was definitely creepy. It also wasn't a false claim at all. It just wasn't a criminal act. More the act of a creepy old man. Maybe he should be in a home instead of wandering freely around churches and children. Number 2. A creepy intruder. A family in Albuquerque experienced something beyond creepy. It all happened when Maris Lopez was deleting videos from her doorbell camera. She discovered the video of a stranger loitering on their porch in front of their front door for 6 hours the night before the video was taken. Maris and the rest of her family watched the video in utter disbelief. The man walked onto their porch at around midnight on a Tuesday. He put his backpack down and then smoked cigarettes and paced back and forth, even dropping his pants to moon the camera at one point. This madness went on for 6 full hours, until the sun began to come up at 6 a.m. He was caught peeping through the windows several times, and he didn't leave until the family woke up. They had no idea he was even there until Maris checked the footage. Luckily, no one was ever harmed. So far as we know, the creep never came back. But still, how could the family ever sleep soundly knowing this guy was still on the prowl? Number 1. The agreeable victim. In the small German town of Rottenburg, a man agreed to be eaten. This was one of the biggest and strangest criminal trials ever in the country. Armin Muse was a perfectly ordinary computer expert, 42 years old, respected by his neighbors. He also had a creepy old mansion, and inside this creepy old mansion, he killed, fried, and ate a man named Bernd Brands. How did the two men meet? Well, Armin placed an advertisement on the internet saying he was looking for someone who would like to be cooked and eaten. Bernd responded to the advertisement. Everyone involved knew exactly what they were getting into. On March 9th of 2001, Bernd showed up at Armin's house to be cooked and eaten. He swallowed 20 sleeping pills, half a bottle of schnapps, and then Armin cut off his manhood, fried it, and the two men ate it together. But this was the last meal they would share. By the early hours of the morning, the romance was over. Bernd was stabbed in the neck, chopped into pieces, and over the next several weeks, those pieces were slowly turned into dinners and lunches and chased down with South African red wine. Police soon arrested Armin and put him on trial for murder. The case got a bit confusing when German lawyers realized cannibalism was never explicitly made illegal in Germany. In the end, even though it had been voluntary and even though there was a video of the entire evening with the victim stating his willingness to be murdered, Armin was given life in prison. The LESULA is a brand new species of primate that was discovered by a team of conservation biologists while they were exploring the Lomami forest in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 2007. The biologists were shocked when they discovered an unusual monkey tethered to a post in the remote jungle town of Opala. They had never seen this monkey before, and it was referred to as LESULA by the locals. It was apparently being kept as a pet by the school director's daughter, who had found the young female monkey after hunters tried to kill its mother. She had adopted the monkey and just kept it around town, tied to a post. It wasn't a very great life, but it was better than the alternative. The biologists continued to explore the area and found another captured male and female, then witnessed their first one in the wild on the shores of the Lomami River. But it would be only 5 years later when genetic tests finally confirmed the LESULA as a new species. Unfortunately, the population of the primate is already in steep decline. They aren't found anywhere else in the world and occupy a geographic range of only around 6,000 square miles. These primates are hunted by the locals and are just about gone from the world, only a few years after being discovered by scientists. Number 9. Purple frog. A new frog species found in India's Western Ghats is unlike any other frog in the world. It's called the Bhupathi purple frog, and it's incredibly strange looking. The frog has deep purple skin and a nose like a pig. Its body is also shaped as an amorphous blob. It doesn't look anything like the typical green hopping tree frogs you and I know about. So why does this new frog look so weird? According to what scientists have managed to put together so far, it looks so strange because it lives underground. Instead of dwelling in the trees and bushes, the purple frog lives inside shallow burrows where it hides from predators. Even more incredible is that it lives underground for its entire life. It never even comes to the surface to eat because it spends all its time gobbling up underground ants and termites. The only reason it was even found is because of torrential rains that flooded the area and caused the frogs to appear on the surface. Scientists also learned that whenever their burrows are flooded by torrential rains, the frogs take the opportunity to mate with other frogs, who they find wandering aimlessly on the surface. If it never rained, they would probably never mate. Number 8. Vampire alien fish. A vampire-like fish that looks a lot like an alien and dates back to prehistoric times has been spotted in the rivers of the United Kingdom for the first time in over 200 years. It's called a lamprey, and it's a type of fish that can grow to be about the size of a person's forearm, and instead of jaws, it has a circular mouth opening filled with razor-sharp teeth. It's one of the most horrifying fish in the entire world, growing to a maximum of 3 feet in length. These beasts used to roam all throughout the waterways of the United Kingdom, but were thought to have gone extinct in the region because of pollution that came with the Industrial Revolution. For the first time since the 1800s, lampreys have been found in Yorkshire, making experts wonder just how exactly they've managed to make a reappearance. Even though lamprey fish do suck blood kinda like vampires, and even though they kind of look like the chest busters from the Alien movies, conservationists are hoping to innovate new techniques in which the few surviving lamprey can find their way to the ancient spawning grounds. In a few years, the UK could be crawling with these horrifying monsters. Number 7. Dancing spider. In Australia, scientists have discovered a new dancing spider. As if spiders weren't bad already, now they apparently are dancing. The arachnid has been named Nemo after the adorable clownfish from the kids' movie, and to be honest, it's kind of fitting. The spider was found near Mount Gambier in the south of Australia by Cheryl Holiday completely by accident. She was taking photographs of blooming purple orchids when she accidentally took a picture of what would become an entirely new species of peacock spider. These spiders can be found throughout Australia and are known for their vibrant colors and their bizarre mating dances. Cheryl shared the photos of the peacock spider on social media, and they caught the attention of arachnologist Joseph Schubert. And many months down the line, the spider became a new species, first described in the journal Evolutionary Systemics. There are now 92 species of peacock spider in Australia. As for just what kind of dancing these spiders really do, it's quite fascinating to watch. Male spiders become extremely colorful when they molt in the spring, which just so happens to be mating season. To attract a female, they hop and dance like trying to summon a rain god. Number 6. Toothless rat. On the island of Sulawesi in Indonesia, an international group of biologists discovered a toothless shrew rat. Suffice it to say, this bizarre rodent shocked the biologists, who were led by Dr. Jacob Esselstyn from McMaster University in Hamilton. The rodent was given a name way too long and complicated for any reasonable person to pronounce, so it's easier to just call it the toothless rat. But why on earth is there a rat with no teeth? Apparently, it doesn't really need them. Its primary diet consists of earthworms. The rat has absolutely no molars and only a small pair of incisors which allow it to eat the soft worms more easily. And in case you were wondering just how rare a rat with no teeth is, well, this is the only species. There are 2,200 known species of rat in the world, and all of them have most of their teeth, while the majority have all of their teeth. According to Dr. Esselstyn, the rat probably lost its teeth because they weren't useful for survival. It likely had teeth to begin with, and then the characteristic was shed through evolution. Number 5. Giant flying squirrel. In the Himalayas, a flying squirrel has been discovered that is so big it's kinda hard to believe. We've all seen sugar gliders before, the notorious flying squirrels that became popular house pets in the 90s before they kept gliding into people's open toilets. There was a lot of tragedy going on back then, but in any case, sugar gliders are small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. They're just little babies. But the new flying squirrel found in the Himalayas is a giant. It's the size of a fat house cat. Amazingly, 2 new squirrel species were found, not just one. We have the Yunnan woolly flying squirrel and the Tibetan woolly flying squirrel. The first lives in the mountains and gorges of China's Yunnan province, while the other lives at altitudes of over 16,000 feet in the Himalayas, where India, Tibet, and Bhutan meet. These gliding mammals each weigh about 5.4 pounds and grow 3 feet from nose to tail. That's roughly the size of a cat. A cat that can literally glide through the mountains. Number 4. Worm with 100 butts. Researchers have discovered a worm with way too many butts. But how many butts is too many? How about 100 butts? This bizarre marine worm was discovered to have a single body, 1 head, and 100 butts. This is possible because the worm's body divides into about 100 branches, and each branch ends in, you guessed it, a butt. But this strangeness doesn't end with butts. This worm can actually reproduce using its butts. When it's time to make new worms, the butt will grow eyes and a brain and become a single worm. It's the oddest and most ridiculous tiny creature known to science. But what is it really? It's called R. multicaudata, and it's a segmented worm. There are thousands of these kinds of worms. However, not too many of them can reproduce using branching bodies just like fungi. Unfortunately, the inner workings of all those butts and brains, well, it's still kind of a mystery. Scientists can't even really figure out how they feed themselves, but we do know they exist, and that's a pretty good start. Number 3. Mystery sea creature. A carcass of a mysterious animal was washed up in the shore on the far east of Russia. It was found on Sakhalin Island, and nobody has been able to identify it. The dead animal had what looked to be a beak. Part of its body was covered in fur, and what may have been paws or actual feet. According to the Siberian Times, the mystery was actually never solved, because after the pictures were taken, a storm came in and sucked the body back out into the ocean. But here's everything we know about it so far. The creature's body was roughly 6 feet long. Its tail was another almost 15 feet. The creature had fuzzy hair, it didn't have any fins, and it had 2 appendages, though nobody could agree on if they ended in paws or feet or if it had claws. Some say the beast may have been a dolphin in the middle of decomposing, which is why it looked so weird. It's just so strange. And since the animal's gone now, we'll probably never figure out what this mysterious sea creature actually was. Number 2. Hammer-headed bat. Believe it or not, the hammer-headed bat is a real living animal. But no, it's not related to the hammerhead shark. It's also not a demon or the Jersey Devil. Instead, it's a perfectly ordinary bat discovered in equatorial Africa that loves eating fruit and doesn't even try to eat people. It's the appearance of the bat that makes it so strange. It has huge lips and a large head that almost makks it look like a fox with wings. Males have enlarged lips that let them make a crazy honking sound like a clown horn. The sound is used by males when they gather together in the hundreds to attract females. They literally fly around squawking and squawking in hopes of finding a date. What's truly remarkable about the hammer-headed bat is that it's the biggest megabat anywhere in Africa. It's absolutely huge, with a wingspan of over 3 feet. It's also one of 3 African fruit bats known to carry the Ebola virus. But even though they're known to host the virus, they do not show symptoms, making it a very mysterious case. Nobody really knows where Ebola came from or how it causes outbreaks, but it is a quite horrific way to die. Outbreaks in the 70s and in the 2000s have caused a major panic. In the Democratic Republic of Congo in 1976, the virus seemed to come out of nowhere, appearing in a small hospital and spreading, killing 90% of its victims before it disappeared. Victims suffered from sore throat, fever, headache, and abdominal pain. Then they began bleeding from the eyes, nose, and other orifices, and they die within days. Is it from eating bats? Maybe just bats that have active symptoms? Scientists are still looking for a pattern. But in any case, even though this bat is awesome, it's not the best choice for a pet or a companion. Number 1. The Olinguito. For the first time anywhere in the Americas in 35 years, a team of scientists from the Smithsonian have discovered a new carnivore species. This was one of the biggest animal discoveries of the last decade. While it's fairly common to find new amphibians, birds, and insects, discovering a new kind of carnivore in the 21st century is kind of unheard of. The animal is called the Olinguito, and it looks like a mix between a bear and a cat. It's actually from the same family as raccoons and kinkajous, though it's the least documented and most unknown of any member. It only weighs about 2 pounds. It lives primarily in the cloud forests of Colombia and Ecuador, and it's only been properly observed by scientists once. The one and only observation of the Olinguito in the wild revealed it's a creature active in the night. Even though it's a carnivore, it still has a diet primarily of fruit, and it births a single baby at a time. It also never comes out of the trees, which is probably why it's so hard to find in places like the Colombian cloud forest where you can barely see the trees or what's going on in them. We don't know how many of these creatures are left, but scientists hope to do more studies out in the jungle. The one thing you never expect to happen while you're simply enjoying a meal at a restaurant is a snake bursting through the ceiling and attacking the customers. And yet this is exactly what happened at a busy restaurant in an unknown location when a giant snake literally crashed through a panel ceiling and fell into the room, nearly landing on someone's head as they tried to eat their dinner. Diners at the restaurant were terrified and didn't know what to do. The snake was colossal too, with estimates placing it at up to 15 feet in length. Unfortunately, nobody's really sure what kind of snake it was. It looked to be some kind of python, although it was never confirmed. It must have been living above the ceiling and was on its way out for business when the tiles gave out and the serpent came crashing down. Staff at the restaurant were quick to wrangle the horrifying monster with a metal hook on a stick, and then they got the snake away from the terrified customers. As of right now, the fate of the snake is unknown, but let's just hope it didn't end up in the soup of the day. What would you have done in a situation like this? Number 9. Rat in the soup. Speaking of soup, a popular restaurant chain in China lost somewhere around $190 million after a pregnant woman discovered a dead rat in her soup broth. It wasn't the missing customers that caused the restaurant to lose money. Instead, it was their stock that hit a low point after photos of the dead rat being held with chopsticks spread across the internet. The restaurant is called Shabu Shabu, and the outlet was located in Shandong province. According to the BBC, the location was temporarily shut down and the woman was offered only about $700 in compensation. It doesn't seem like nearly enough to me. The worst part of the incident by far is that the woman actually took a few slurps of her soup before discovering the rat. Ew. And here's where things get really bonkers. In an interview with local news, the woman's husband claimed that she was worried about her baby's health, so one of the staff members actually suggested his wife abort the baby if she was so worried. And obviously, that's insanely inappropriate. After all, the woman had only wanted some yummy soup. Number 8. Heart attack, heart attack. There's a popular restaurant located in the famous Fremont Street in Las Vegas called Heart Attack Grill. As the name implies, it's a great place to go for a heart attack. Their slogan is "Taste worth dying for," suggesting it's okay to die from a heart attack so long as the food is delicious. So would you eat at a place called Heart Attack Grill? Well, John Allman was the unofficial spokesman for the restaurant, who would stand out front, hawking burgers and gathering customers, telling anyone who would listen to come inside and try the amazing food. Well, he actually did die of a heart attack. Yes, this is the definition of irony. He was waiting for a bus in front of the restaurant when he suddenly went into cardiac arrest, was transported to the hospital, and then later removed from life support. According to the New York Post, Allman frequently ate many of the foods on the menu. Some of the most horrific dishes sold at Heart Attack Grill include something called the Quadruple Bypass Burger, which comes equipped with 9,982 calories. John Allman was not the first unofficial spokesman for the Heart Attack Grill to die, though. In 2011, a 575-pound man named Blair, the Gentle Giant River, died of flu-related pneumonia. Not long after River's death, a different man had a heart attack while inside the restaurant. Customers were actually laughing and taking pictures because they thought it was a publicity stunt. Then in April of 2012, a woman in her 40s collapsed, eating one of the double bypass burgers, smoking cigarettes, and having a margarita. Number 7. El Poco Loco Killer. El Poco Loco is a great place to get Mexican food. Or so you thought it was until you heard this story. It's also apparently a great place to be stabbed in the parking lot. Police were recently on the hunt for a slasher who ran off after stabbing someone multiple times in the parking lot of a Hollywood El Polo Loco restaurant. Talk about bad dining experience, -5 stars. The victim and the attacker had gotten into a brawl in the parking lot. That was where the attacker pulled out a knife and stabbed the guy several times. The attacker ran off and the victim managed to stumble back into the restaurant where he then collapsed. At which point, the authorities were called and he was quickly whisked away to the hospital in critical condition. At the time of the attack, there weren't many details available. The crime scene was blocked off and police were searching the area. So far as we know, the crazed attacker has yet to be found. His motives for trying to kill the victim are also currently unknown. Nobody's sure what these two guys were arguing about. Maybe it was over who got the last taco. Do you have any other ideas on what the El Polo Loco fight was all about? Let me know in the comments section below. And if you're liking this video, then be sure to hit that thumbs up and the subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. Free baby. In Jersey City, a teenager walked into the El Patron restaurant holding a newborn baby. According to the restaurant owner, Frankie Aguilar, she walked up to a pair of Good Samaritans, told them she'd discovered the infant outside, handed the baby over to a woman later identified as Elise Scott, and then ran away. She literally handed the baby to a stranger and walked out of the restaurant and vanished. Suffice it to say, Elise Scott ended up with a lot more than she bargained for when deciding to stop off for lunch. She went in to get a snack and ended up with a random baby. But here's the deal, that baby almost certainly belonged to that teenage girl. It had also been born probably just a couple minutes before being handed over. The baby still had its umbilical cord attached and was having difficulty breathing. The police were called and paramedics responded with medical gear and oxygen. The newborn baby was rescued and left the restaurant in good health. According to ABC 7 News, the child has since been put up for adoption. As for the young girl who dropped her off, she was only 14 years old, and she won't be facing any charges. Business owner actually said he's happy the teen mom chose his El Patron restaurant to seek help, while the Good Samaritan said she'd be happy to even become the baby's godmother. Number 5. Exploding KFC. In North Carolina, a KFC served up a bit more than fried chicken. At 12:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning, the entire restaurant exploded. Luckily, nobody was actually in the restaurant at the time it blew up. But it was extremely fortunate that the explosion happened at night and not during the evening dinner rush just a few hours earlier. Even more horrifying is that, according to the police, employees had smelled gas just before they closed the restaurant for the night. The manager shut off the gas nozzle, thinking it would solve the problem. The manager also called the gas company and was hoping to get the problem solved in the morning. After the last employee closed up shop, they went across the street to purchase a drink, and much to their shock, they witnessed the KFC go up in flames. They escaped with their life just in time before being turned into Kentucky Fried Human. As for the cause of the leak, police were not able to immediately confirm it. The local gas company was investigating, but no cause was ever announced. Number 4. Hot dogs and drugs. In Florida, a restaurant owner named Louis Younglove is facing charges of drug trafficking after getting caught running an illegal business out of their hot dog restaurant. According to Fox News, the owner of Chi-Town Italian Beef and Hot Dogs has been accused of dealing drugs along with selling hot dogs. Taken into custody, the owner was in possession of a huge amount of various illegal substances, including cocaine, marijuana, and Adderall. They also had $18,000 in cash on them. Then at the guy's house, police found $500,000 in cash and even more drugs. According to the Miami Herald, authorities attempted to take Younglove into custody and executed a search warrant while he was driving to work. He allegedly tried to flee and ended up smashing into an unmarked cop car and was apprehended. How did this restaurant owner get busted? It was detectives who discovered a bit more on the menu than just food. The place was known around town for selling narcotics right out of the restaurant. If you knew what to ask for, you could literally walk up to this place, get yourself a pizza and a chili, and walk away with more illegal substances than most people would know what to do with. This is not really what people mean when they talk about a place having a secret menu. Number 3. Machete attack. At a restaurant in Ohio, a wild man wielding a machete attacked 4 people in an act of indiscriminate violence before the police showed up and shot and killed the guy. According to ABC News, he was a known person of interest to the FBI, but not being fully investigated. The suspect was later identified as Mohammed Berry, a 30-year-old man who didn't appear to have any logical motive for carrying out the insane attack. Customers were at the Nazareth Restaurant and Deli in Columbus, minding their own business and eating some good food, when the man walked in, briefly talked to an employee, then returned 30 minutes later with a machete in hand and began trying to chop people into pieces. A mother from the restaurant ran outside with her kids and phoned 911 right away. She said, "Some guy pulled out a machete and started stabbing people." Some have described the brutal violence as a terror attack, though it didn't really seem to be prompted by anything specifically. The people were literally just eating and no one had even provoked the attacker at all. People didn't even really notice him until he came back with a weapon. The restaurant location was also apparently completely random. It's not like this guy just had a burning hatred in his heart for the deli. Police said that some of the customers even tried to fight back. Some of the patrons there started throwing chairs at him, just trying to get him out of there, Columbus Police Sergeant Rich Weiner said, according to the AP. There was no rhyme or reason as to who he was going after. In total, 4 victims were hospitalized, but luckily nobody died during the traumatic incident, except of course the guy with the machete. Talk about a bad day to eat out. Number 2. Iced tea poison. A woman in Utah was out for a meal with her family at Dickey's Barbecue in South Jordan when she accidentally drank a cup of poison. This wasn't poison as in spoiled milk or something harmless, it was actual poison. And she got it from the self-serve machine. Here's what happened. Jan Harding, a 67-year-old woman, filled her cup with iced tea from the self-serve unit. She then immediately spat it out, though not before swallowing some of it. It turned out that an employee at the restaurant mistakenly poured lye into the iced tea machine instead of powdered iced tea mix. This insanely dangerous mix-up resulted in Jan Harding nearly dying. And if you're wondering what lye is, it's an odorless chemical that kinda looks like sugar, and it's used for deep cleaning things like fryers. Lye's also the most active ingredient in Drano and is usually used by serial killers when burying bodies. After drinking the poison, the horrible liquid went through the woman's esophagus and left ulcerated burns. She had to spend 2 weeks in hospital, but did not file charges against the restaurant, instead choosing to enter immediately into mediation, probably for a great big payout. Number 1. Pocket bomb. At a restaurant in Mumbai, a customer had a very bad time after his cell phone exploded in his pocket. The incident was even caught on video. The guy was sitting at a table, Everything was completely normal, and he was eager to gobble up his food, and all of a sudden, smoke started pouring out of his pants. He jumped away from the table and tried to take the phone out of his pocket, while the other people in the restaurant left him for dead and made a mad break for it. Apparently, the phone exploded in his pocket because of a faulty battery, essentially catching his pants on fire and burning into his leg. The explosion from the phone left a pretty big hole in this guy's pants and burned straight through his skin. He had to be admitted to the local hospital, though he did make a full recovery. And while not the restaurant's fault by any means, it was still a pretty bad dining experience for the guy with the defective phone and the hole in his pants. 34-year-old David Wall was an experienced thrill-seeking enthusiast. For years, he's been doing all kinds of extreme sports like skydiving, car racing, snowboarding. He was also super into motorcycles. The Utah native had been living in Europe for the last couple years, but in September of 2020, his high-octane life would get the better of him. He was in the Churfürsten mountain range in Switzerland on a wingsuiting adventure. Yeah, but we probably need to clear up what exactly is a wingsuit. The typical wingsuit design has webbed wing surfaces between the arms and legs. The force of the opposing air inflates those webs by pushing air through inlets in the suit, supporting and keeping the airfoil semi-rigid throughout the flight or jump. Essentially, you're supposed to be able to glide through the air just like a bird. Wall jumped from the highest spot within a cluster of peaks at an elevation of 7,566 feet. This is an insanely high spot even for an extreme sport like this. He crashed into the side of a mountain and he never got back up. Number 9. Deadly accident in Brazil. Another recent wingsuit failure happened in Brazil in 2021. A Moroccan-American man traveled to the mountain of Pedra da Gávea near Rio de Janeiro to fly just like a bird. He set off to climb to the top of the great mountain to spread his wings. He took the leap, and nobody ever saw where he landed. Authorities had to be called in to search for the guy's body. He was found 2 hours later. Not much was left of him, as most of him was splattered. And it's not clear exactly what went wrong with his flight, though initial reports suggested his parachute simply didn't open. Nobody actually saw him crash, as this guy was more of a lone wolf when it came to extreme sports, which, by the way, it's really not a great idea. He was definitely dead upon arrival. The 42-year-old was a resident of North Carolina, and had worked at the American Bank for over 20 years. He will be sadly missed. Wingsuits are no joke, and one wrong move can spell disaster. Statistics show that 72% of wingsuit jumpers have witnessed serious injury or death of other participants in the sport, and 43% of them have suffered a significant injury from a base jump. And 76 had experienced at least one near-miss incident, where a serious injury or fatality was avoided through sheer luck. Number 8. Jet-powered fail. A man from France named Vincent Raffet got into a bit of an accident with a jet-powered wingsuit, though actually the device was less of a wingsuit and kind of more of a jetpack, and the accident was less of an accident and more of a death. The tragic incident happened in Dubai during a training exercise. You see, Vince was a professional jetpack pilot, a trained athlete, and he was already famous online for posting viral videos of his amazing jetpack stunts. Vince was also the first jetpack pilot to attempt high-altitude flight using a jet-powered wingsuit, like a super primitive version of Iron Man's suit. Even though other pilots had jumped from helicopters wearing jetpacks, Vince was the first to launch from the ground and soar upwards into the atmosphere. But what went wrong this time? The suit is powered by 4 miniature jet engines. The controls allow a pilot to move in any direction they want to maneuver and to perform rolls and loops. And the suit has a maximum altitude of 20,000 feet. The maximum duration is 13 minutes, and the top speed is 253 miles per hour. Vince should have been totally fine, but unfortunately, he didn't use his emergency parachute while descending and plummeted to his death. Number 7. Death of a champ. Dr. Angelo Grabisic from Willenhall in the UK recently perished while flying a wingsuit in Saudi Arabia. The tragic incident has been described as a misadventure by local news. Grabisic was a talented astronautical engineer and the leader of a wingsuit design team at the University of Southampton. He was known for working on propulsion systems for spacecraft. He had helped initiate the Icarus project, a plot to design better, safer, and faster wingsuits. And he was a kind and honest person loved by his students, his family, and his friends. But unfortunately, something went horribly wrong with his final flight. At first, everything seemed to be going fine. He jumped out of the helicopter and was gliding through the air perfectly. But then something happened. He was flying too low. He misjudged the height of a ridge and he crashed. He then tumbled the rest of the way to the ground, suffering such severe injuries that by the time paramedics got to him, it was too late. So what do you think so far? Would you ever want to try wingsuit flying? I don't think I would, but you let me know in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, then be sure to hit that thumbs up and the subscribe buttons if you haven't already. And now, more wingsuit disasters. Number 6, a deadly competition. As if wingsuits weren't dangerous enough on their own, there are actually wingsuit diving competitions in which people race wearing these crazy suits. You have to be a little mad to get into this sport, and according to Newsweek, a veteran skydiver was recently competing in one of these insane races when he tragically crashed and died. His name was Dmitry Didenko, and he was competing in the Wingsuit Diving Championships in Western Australia. Dmitry jumped out of an aircraft and lost the race almost immediately. His parachute never deployed, and he literally tumbled all the way to the ground and died on impact. Well, he may have been alive for a few seconds or minutes, but he was definitely dead by the time they scraped his body off the ground. And it was all because of a failed parachute. According to WA Today, about 20 people, including friends, witnessed Didenko's jump go awry while skydivers on the ground tried desperately to save him. Tributes poured in like rain for the adrenaline junkie as friends and fellow skydivers remembered Didenko as an amazing friend and soulful adventurer. A fellow skydiver, MG Franco, wrote over Instagram, "Fly high, we'll miss your amazing madness." This really proves how horrifyingly dangerous wingsuits are, and just how risky this all is. You have to have nerves of steel to do stuff like this. And Dmitry had gone over 6,000 jumps all around the world throughout his thrill-seeking life. He was a legendary skydiver, but it was strapping into a wingsuit that finally ended his career and killed him. He was only 30 years old and still had a long life to live, but then again, when you live dangerously close to the edge, sometimes you slip. Or in this case, when you jump off of something or out of something really high, trying to fly like you were born with wings, the landing might not go so well. Number 5, the desperate warning. Some of the extra risks that come with wingsuiting are flat spins, aka uncontrollable spinning; burble, meaning a vortex in the parachute deployment area; tail strikes, meaning hitting an aircraft's tail on exit; and twists, meaning a spinning parachute. The need to control a suit during a malfunction, such as having to depressurize inflated wings prior to opening a parachute, can result in the most serious of injuries and death. And sometimes the parachute just doesn't open. Statistics say that 1 in 1,000 parachutes will fail to open. A tourist from Beijing was missing for 7 days before her body was finally discovered, deep in the forests of Tianmen Mountain National Park, after a horrifying wingsuit accident that went horribly wrong. The unidentified victim and a cameraman jumped from over 8,000 feet above the scenic area in central China, but there were problems almost immediately. The woman strayed from the proper route and rapidly descended towards the trees. The cameraman tried desperately to warn her. He waved and screamed, but she simply never took notice. She was deviating significantly from the agreed flight path, and then she was gone. She vanished from sight and fell into the trees, and it's believed that her parachute never opened. This means she fell 8,000 feet and never slowed down for a second until she smacked into the ground. The reason her body was so difficult to find is because the area in which she fell was vast, dark, and almost completely inaccessible. Search teams, helicopters, drones scoured the area for 7 days before they finally found the poor traveler. Suffice it to say, she was in pretty dire condition when they finally discovered her broken, doll-like body. Number 4, into the power lines. A Russian man in a wingsuit leapt off an Italian cliff and landed in some power lines. Talk about a shocking turn of events. The guy died in what has been described as a horrific accident after being electrocuted to death. The incident happened in Shimakapi, a popular destination with tourists that overlooks Lake Garda. The Russian's wingsuit was stranded inflatable fabric with specialized arms and legs that provide lift. But the lift provided by his suit took him directly into a mess of power lines, at which point he was delivered a fatal dose of electricity. According to a local police officer, he had probably misjudged where he was jumping from, and that's what cost him his life. The same officer also said he was electrocuted instantaneously when he hit the power lines. Wingsuit accidents have become so commonplace in Italy that the local rescuers charged with retrieving the dead bodies actually went on protest to try and stop the sport from taking place. Nevertheless, people are still jumping. And this is despite around 74 confirmed deaths involving wingsuits in just the last 3 years. So what do you think? Should this sport be banned? Or are you more of the opinion that it's their life and if they want to take that leap of faith, then let them? Number 3. The last jump. Extreme athlete Dean Potter has died in a tragic wingsuit accident. This guy was famous for his crazy cliff climbs and his horrifying death-defying extreme jumps. He was one of 2 men killed after leaping from 7,500 feet in Yosemite National Park. Dean and his jumping partner went missing shortly after going up the mountain. Park rangers searched for them overnight, but to no avail. It wasn't until the next morning that a helicopter crew spotted both their bodies deep in Yosemite Valley. The men were still wearing their wingsuits, but it didn't appear as if their parachutes had deployed. As you can probably tell by now if you've watched this entire video, parachutes not deploying seems to be the main cause of death in wingsuit accidents. It's almost like these things need a complete redesign, because the parachutes simply don't deploy when they're supposed to. The athlete knew the risks every time he decided to fly off a cliff with a parachute. He even lost a friend just a year before to a base jumping accident and spoke at that friend's memorial service. A fellow climber, Chris McNamara, said he always recognized how dangerous the sport was and at the same time how magical it was. The tension between those two things. But here's why Dean Potter and his partner had gone jumping solo without telling anyone. It's actually illegal to do this in national parks, and so the guys probably went at dusk or even during the night so they didn't get caught. Well, this was the last jump they ever attempted, as they both plummeted to the bottom of the valley and came face to face with death. Number 2, saved by trees. Base jumper Eric Dos Santos from San Diego was left broken after a terrifying wingsuit accident that was all caught on his helmet camera. He was flying in his wingsuit at 90 miles per hour in France when he misjudged where the top of the trees were. He didn't pull up enough and he ended up clipping the top of a tree, and the mistake sent him spinning down to the forest floor, where he smacked the ground extremely hard and blacked out. Eric woke up in a hospital sometime later and found out he had spent 3 hours laying crippled on the forest floor until trail workers eventually found him. This is one of those rare cases where base jumping gone wrong didn't actually result in a death. The incident left him with several broken bones, but he walked away with his life. He fractured his scapula, his clavicle, 3 left ribs, and he suffered head trauma and deep lacerations, but in all seriousness, he should have died, and it's actually beyond super lucky he's still alive. Number 1, faceplant into a mountain. Jeb Corliss has been base jumping for around 20 years. He also had an extensive career using wingsuits. In 2012, Jeb jumped from the Table Mountain in South Africa, an altitude of 3,558 feet. He flew downwards at 120 miles per hour. And during the flight, his foot touched a boulder and sent him crashing into the side of the mountain. But he was miraculously able to pull his parachute even after doing a faceplant. And it was thanks to his parachute that he had a much gentler time falling down to the bottom of the mountain, where he was found alive but in very dire condition. He had 2 broken legs and a torn ACL and needed reconstructive surgeries. He spent over a year in hospital in South Africa. Despite this horrible episode of wingsuit diving gone wrong, Jeb got right back on the horse after being discharged from the hospital and jumped on live television in 2013 in China, sailing through a dangerous V-shaped slot about 15 feet wide. It was a daredevil move, but he did it anyways, and he survived. Thanks for watching. Would you ever consider trying a wingsuit, or do you think it's totally nuts? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already, and then come back again for another gut-wrenching video. We'll see you next time.